All right. I want to welcome everyone to the first virtual meeting of the 2024 year. And this is the Northern New England chapter of SABR. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner Waterman chapter in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, to reach the majors, a ball player not only must possess natural ability and world-class skills, but must also overcome nearly insurmountable odds. The journey is not possible without extreme dedication. Along the way, mentors play a large role and circumstances must align. For an elite few, years of effort and perseverance culminate with putting on a big league uniform. Drawing on original interviews with more than 100 players who debuted between 1961 and 2018, this collection presents their first-person stories of how they were called up to play Major League Baseball. My good friend Zach Ford is the chair of the Dusty Baker chapter in Sacramento. He also serves on the advisory committee of the Pacific Coast League Historic Society and is the author of Called Up, Ball Players Remember Becoming Major Leaguers. Zach, welcome to Northern New England, my friend. How you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Look
Ah,
forward to chatting with you about that book called Up.
great to have you here this evening. I'm just going to back up, let you do your
All
thing.
right.
You're on, my man.
I'll go ahead and share the screen and we'll get the party started. All righty. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to your great organization. I'm here to talk about Called Up, which is my new book, Ball Players Remember Becoming Major Leaguers. First off, I'll do a little bit about me, give you a little bit of context, and then I'll go into a few stories. Chair of the Dusty Baker-Sacramento SABR chapter. So SABR has been an important part of my life since I was in high school. Actually been involved in that chapter since about the second year that it was around. Pacific Coast League has been something that's been very special to me since I was a young baseball fan. My great uncle played in the old Pacific Coast League. So I was able to go to a lot of his reunions, befriend a lot of his former teammates and opponents, and really grew a deep love for the baseball that was out here on the West Coast prior to the Giants and the Dodgers. To provide a little bit of context of what would influence me to put together this book, first and foremost, my favorite baseball book is The Glory of Their Times. I discovered that book when I was a young baseball fan. And even though a lot of those players were well over 100 years older than me, Ritter presented their first person narratives in a way that I was able to connect with them as human beings. So he was great at being able to capture the feelings and emotions of being a baseball player at that particular time. So there's still a lot of similarities as far as the themes, as far as the feelings and emotions of those particular ball players as they're going about their professional journey, which still resonated with me, even though, like I said, they were so much older and many generations removed. Like most of us, I dreamed of becoming a professional baseball player and a major leaguer. In fact, I am 45 years old. I still have the dream of taking the field at Candlestick Park, and Candlestick Park being demolished in 2015 definitely eliminated that possibility, if not for the sake that I hit about 200 in Little League and didn't have a chance to begin with. So when you have about a 200 Little League average, you try and find other ways to be involved in the game. And baseball research, the history of the game, and collecting first-person player stories has been a hobby of mine for over 30 years since I was a young baseball fan. A lot, as I said earlier about the Pacific Coast League, a lot of my interest in the Pacific Coast League originated from my great uncle, Larry Powell. He was considered a prospect in the league in the late 30s with the San Francisco Seals. In fact, he was purchased in the same deal as Dominic DiMaggio by the Red Sox after the 1939 season. Um, However, the deal was that Dominique would go to the Red Sox in 1940. My uncle would stay in San Francisco for one more year of seasoning, and then he'd go to spring training in 41, kind of test the waters there, go from there. Went to spring training in 41, didn't make the team out of camp, but remained with the Red Sox even after he was drafted into the service. He spent time overseas, played baseball in Europe, saw combat overseas, and then by the time he got back to baseball, spring training in 1946, he did make the Red Sox out of camp. However, the Red Sox got off to a great start that year, and the services of a near 32-year-old rookie who had no major league experience weren't really needed. So after a few weeks, he got released before getting into a game. About the next day, the Red Sox or the Boston Braves picked him up, and he had the same situation where he was on the roster for about a week or two, didn't get into a game. So his experience as a phantom major leaguer, a phantom major leaguer, meaning that he's on a roster but not in a game, is definitely an influence for this project and for the work that I do. Here you can see how intimidating I was as a little leaguer. Looking like I am scared of an inside pitch from the cameraman. Here I am, Will Clark, a right-handed Will Clark in 1989 for Halloween. And then here is a collection of some photos of my great uncle, who, like I said, is one of my all-time favorite guys. A little bit about the book. It's a collection of 109 first-person player stories. They're all original interviews. And my goal was to capture the feelings and emotions of becoming a baseball player. So the stories, the goal of the stories were not to capture a detailed timeline of becoming a Major League Baseball player. It's the feelings and emotions of that time in that ball player's life. Debuts range from 1961 to 2018, so it's quite a diverse range time frame there. The first player in the book is Sam McDowell, who came up with 1961 Indians. And the most recent debut is 2018 Patrick Wisdom, came up with the St. Louis Cardinals. He is the only active player in the book. He's currently with the Chicago Cubs. Players, their service ranges from just 2 days to over 2 decades. So I wasn't planning on putting a phantom major leaguer in the book, but there was one story that was just too good to not include. So he's the one with 2 days service time. And then 2 decades, I have Jerry Royce, who spent over 2 decades in the big leagues. So definitely a different, a wide variety of major league service time. I did arrange the debuts in order by time frame. So there's 4 different sections in the book. There's 60s and 70s, there's 80s, 90s, and then since 2000. And this will give you an idea of some of the common themes that were happening in baseball at that particular time, things that were impacting rosters and call-ups. And nearly all teams are represented. All teams were represented when I first did the interviews. I interviewed 149 players, and just the way it worked out, this is my first book. So admittedly, I was a little bit green going into it and did not think of releases. So when I went back out and got releases, I got 109 releases, and there are 2 teams that were not represented, the Diamondbacks and the Astros, but there are other teams that are in there. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the time frame sections, so just so we have a little bit of context of what's going on, what's impacting major league rosters at the time, what is impacting call-ups at that particular time. So the 60s and 70s, obviously the 60s and 70s were huge decades of expansion, going from 16 to 26 teams. A lot of changes, minor league level, amateur draft started for the first time. Labor relations were starting to change as well. There are 17 players from the 60s and 70s that are featured in the book. 1980s started off with labor strife. 1981, there are a few stories that are impacted by the 1981 strike. even dating back into the the 70s, but really in the 80s and more so even in the 90s was the changing role of pitching. The relief pitchers change it, the dominance or the number of relief pitchers that teams would carry obviously increased the role of closers as well. So that impacted how major league rosters were formulated. For a few years there in the 80s, rosters were cut from 25 to 24 teams. There are 15 players in the 80s that are featured in the book. Now, the 90s, obviously another decade of expansion, more labor challenges, the lockout and the strike. There are a few stories that are impacted by that, both towards the end of the 1994 season when players obviously did not get their September call-ups, and then how that actually impacted the following spring training and going into that particular year of 1995. There are some stories that detail that. More changes to the disabled list, which is now the injured list, but that changed the frequency of roster moves as well, obviously. And this is the decade that has the most representation of any, and it's 42 players from that decade are in the book. Since 2000, obviously statistical analysis has been around for decades, but really over the last 20 years or so, the last generation, there's been a larger prominence of statistical analysis and how that is used to impact rosters. Huge changes in minor leagues over the last few years, and a lot of changes too to the injured list and how you can use that, which impact the ups and downs of the players on the major league roster. There are 35 players in the book that made their major league debut since the year 2000. Now, I'll provide a little bit of an overview of the stories just in general, and then I'll get into a few Northeast examples for you guys. Again, the goal of this book and the goal when I was going after these stories was to capture the first-person human interest element of getting called up to the major leagues and becoming a Major League Baseball player. And those feelings and emotions is what I wanted to capture. So the first question I asked players was, when did you first realize you had the talent to become a Major League Baseball player? Now, from the wording of that question, you may think, okay, well, I want to hear whether or not it's, a junior in college or in AA. No. I asked that question not because I was expecting an age or a time frame. I asked that question because I knew that when they thought of that age, when they thought of that particular time frame, they were going to think about what clicked to them. Who were some of the mentors that were impacting their journey at that particular time? Their mom and dad who used to, go to those Little League games or those high school games and provided that extra coaching. That was the reason why I asked that question. And oftentimes answers to that question would then reoccur. There would be, I would see references to that question when they were talking about their call-up, when they were talking about their debut, as far as some of the first people they called or how they were feeling, etc. And these stories, these narratives have only been edited very minimally from the interview transcripts. So these are the words of the players. If I, was talking to a player and they were telling me a particular story and I had a follow-up question afterwards, then obviously I would then move that text further into the transcript, into the narrative. Or if somebody said something like, I went out and threw 4 or 5 innings, and I found out it was 5 innings, I would make that kind of correction. But other than that, these are the words of the player. So they're going to read like spoken words. So there may be a little bit of minor grammar errors, but there was definitely an emphasis to make sure that the game details, even though that was not the focus of my project, definitely made an effort to make sure that all of those are factually accurate as well. But again, the feeling or the goal of this was not that, but it was to capture the feeling and emotions of those particular stories. So I'm going to go ahead and share a few stories with you, and then I'll go ahead and do some Q&A. The first story I'm going to go ahead and share is a story that is a ball player who is a huge favorite amongst Sabre folks, and that's the story of Bobby Grich. Bobby Grich comes up with the 1970 Orioles. At the time, he was playing for the Rochester Red Wings, and that particular team was stacked, well, much like the Orioles were at that particular time, too. I think he was batting behind Don Baylor in that particular lineup at the AAA level. So I want to say he was hitting something around like 380 when he got called up. He got called in the office by Cal Ripken Sr. Cal Ripken Sr. is a big, heavy smoker. He said that he walks into this office. Cal Ripken Sr. takes a huge drag of his Camel cigarette, blows it into the air, and says, "Hey, you're going to Baltimore tomorrow, Bobby." So Bobby Grich, he goes to Baltimore. All right. He goes into Memorial Stadium. He's walking into the clubhouse and he sees this office. It's a door is a little cracked open. He knows this is the manager's office. Does a little tap on the door, peeks his head in, and says, "Hi, my name is Bobby Grich. I'm here to report to for my first day. I just got called up." Earl Weaver, being the warm and fuzzy man that he is, does not get up from his chair. He just looks up and says, "Is there anything else you need to tell me?" That's the interaction. That's the orientation that Earl Weaver and Bobby Grich received. That's their introduction to the big leagues, but everything ended up being okay. Bobby Grich obviously ended up becoming a team Hall of Famer with the Baltimore Orioles. He became a team Hall of Famer with the Angels as well. But definitely a unique, unexpected introduction to your big league manager. But that was definitely something that Earl Weaver was known for, just being a kind of a rough guy who's not very warm and fuzzy. So that particular day, he's going to be playing in Washington. So they take the bus over from Memorial Stadium to play the Senators. And who's pitching for the Senators that day but a guy by the name of Casey Cox. Now, Casey Cox, unfortunately, I think he just passed away, but Casey Cox attended the same high school as Bobby Grich. He was a few years older. They did not overlap. They weren't teammates. But to give a little bit of context, to think about that, to have your major league debut against somebody who pitched for the same high school that you had played on, just a few years prior, is definitely an interesting element to the story. He goes 0 for 3 with a walk in his major league debut. But the next day, he walks in the locker room and he sees a cake. And the cake says, "Welcome to Baltimore, Bobby." All right. This is going to be the excerpt. I'm going to read from Bobby Grich's story. Frank Robinson and all the other guys come in. He says, "Who bakes a cake for somebody who gets a walk? You didn't do anything last night. You got a walk. What's this cake all about?" He was giving me a bad time, I said, "Well, come on in, guys. Let's have a piece of cake." Pete Richard took a piece of the cake and then took a bite. He goes, "Wait a minute. That's sour cream. Smell that." I started to smell it, and he goes, "No, put your nose a little bit closer." I heard somebody kind of giggle. I knew right then and there they were going to throw my face down into that cake if I got too close. It was a total setup. My instincts picked up on it. I jumped away. He tried to push me down. I think the tip of my nose hit the cake, but that was it. So he didn't get me. That was the first time I'd seen that prank played. Anytime a rookie was called up during the season, I was in on that joke from there on out. We got a bunch of rookies. Somebody would go over, or they would go over, smell the cake. Somebody would then come behind them, smash their face into it. It was pretty funny. That's Bobby Grich's orientation to the big leagues. All right, I'm going to fast forward a few years here. All right, this guy, Jason Hartek, comes up 1996 with the Mets. A relatively high pick. He's a third-round pick, 1990 by the Indians, and goes through some trades, goes through a few injuries, and ends up getting Rule 5 picked by the Mets in 1995. But things end up clearing. He ends up going to Norfolk Tide. He's called in by Steve Phillips after losing the playoffs, but he's told that he's going to be going up to the big leagues. One of the things that's really cool about his story, too, is that Jason grew up in the Milwaukee area, and he was a big fan of Robin Yount growing up. So when he went into his big league clubhouse for the first time as an active major leaguer, he was very pleasantly surprised to see that he had number 19 on his jersey. He played his first game against the Braves and Greg Maddux. And guess what? He actually had a pretty good game against Maddux. He went 2 for 5 with 2 doubles. All right. So here's a few excerpts from his story. When I show up, I go find my locker to see what number they gave me. I was born in Wisconsin, so my family followed the Brewers. I was a big Brewers fan growing up, and my favorite player was Robin Yount. I looked at my locker. I saw Hardtech number 19. I could not believe it. All right, so that's that, but I'm going to fast forward to his insights for the game. Greg Maddux was pitching for the Braves. I was nervous and my legs were a little shaky, but for the most part, I was pretty good. My first at bat, I go up there and I get 2 strikes. I'm like, whatever you do, you just can't strike out your first at bat. As a hitter, that's not something you want to think. I ended up popping up to the second baseman, Mark Lemke. I remember hitting first base, looping around and thinking, thank God. That was probably the happiest I've ever been hitting an infield pop-up, which was a little weird. I settled in a little bit, got a couple of ground balls in the field, and I felt like I could relax and play. I faced Maddux the next 2 at-bats also. I ended up hitting a double into the right center field and then another double into left center field. It was pretty special to get my first couple of hits off of him. I could sit down and go, oh man, I just went 2 for 3 off of Greg Maddux with 2 doubles. Everything he did in the game was amazing. I had ups and downs my whole career, but at that point, I had played in the big leagues and I had gotten hits in the big leagues. No one would be able to take that away from me. It was a huge sigh of relief. That's Jason Hardtech's orientation to the big leagues. Got a couple other stories, an Expo, then a Red Sox, and then I'll do some Q&A. All right, so Rick DeHart. Rick DeHart is a interesting story here. Rick DeHart was undrafted after college, and he goes to work. He's working basically a graveyard type job. And when he was going to this particular job, oftentimes he'd swing by a little mini mart, and every week there'd be those baseball weeklies that would come out, or those Baseball Americas. Remember those would be coming out in the 90s and before, a little bit after. But at the bottom of those, at the end of those magazines, there were advertisements. Sometimes it'd be for like umpire school or different ways to get involved in baseball. And he saw an advertisement for a new Taiwan league that was soliciting, trying to look for players. So he's a little over a year out of school, but he sees this ad and figures that drive is still in him. So he decides that he's going to try out for this new league in Taiwan. I believe he said it was about $400 to go to this tryout. The tryout included food and housing for the week. So he kind of passed the hat amongst his family, and they were able to raise $500. That $500 covered that tryout. It also covered a Greyhound bus ticket from Kansas to Florida for the tryout. Obviously, keep in mind, this is well before cell phones, smartphones. He says he has a Walkman and some magazines that he has to entertain him for this Greyhound bus from Kansas to Florida tryout. Things go well in this tryout. He's actually offered a contract to go to Taiwan and play in this league. But at this tryout, too, there were other scouts from other teams in the States and an organized ball that were just kind of testing the waters, trying to see if they could poach some players. And that's what happens. Expo scout sees them and says, hey, look, do you really want to go to Taiwan? I might be able to have an opportunity for you here in organized ball. What you want to do? So he ends up deciding to go to the Expos organization instead. All right. So, it's, 5 years, 6 years into his pro career. And he's kind of reached the point where, how much longer am I going to do this? How much longer am I going to pursue this goal? Between games of a doubleheader, they pass out paychecks. And he says he looks at his paycheck and goes, man, I don't know if I could pay rent this month. I might as, I'm at the point where I might as well just quit and go to McDonald's. Like this is getting ridiculous. And, he's frustrated, crumples up his paycheck, throws it in the back of his locker. Sure, he had a few choice words to go along with that too. But a few minutes later, he gets a tap on his shoulder from the manager. It says, hey, look, bud, you need to go into the office. Now, he's thinking it's the manager is contacting him and wants to talk to him because of his behavior, because he was openly venting about the situation that he was in. But the manager wasn't. The manager brought him into the dugout to tell him, hey, look, you're going to the big leagues. You're a major leaguer now. He actually took Lee Smith's spot on the roster, the Expos, after Lee Smith retired. One of the first things when Rick DeHart arrives to join the Expos is he has a voicemail at his hotel room from Pedro Martinez. And Pedro Martinez says, hey, bud, I'm going to take you out to lunch and buy you a suit tomorrow. So that's one of the first experiences he has is Pedro Martinez kind of takes him under his wing and takes him out to get a suit. He ends up eventually making his major league debut against the Phillies. And it went from what would have been an extremely quick outing to a very challenging outing. So I'm going to go ahead and read you excerpt from his story where he's talking about his major league debut. There was one out and men on first and second. Rico Brogna swings at the very first pitch, hits a weak ground ball to second base. The second baseman flips it to our shortstop, Mark Grizzlonic, who steps in the bag and starts walking to the dugout. He thought there were 3 outs, but there were only 2 outs. He never threw the ball to first. Now I've got a guy on third and first with 2 outs. The next pitch was a fastball inside. I threw a wild pitch. The runner ends up scoring. I'm thinking, God, they're going to send me down after the game. That's how my mind was working. I walked the next batter, and the guy after that gets a hit. Then the highlight of the outing was Curt Schilling came up to bat. I'm like, no way. I just watched this guy on TV last summer. Now I'm facing him. I ended up striking Schilling out because he took a fastball looking. Innings over, I walked back to the dugout. But my debut went from a 1-pitch double play to a wild pitch, walk, base hit. Regardless, I ended up staying up for about a month. That's Rick DeHart's story about getting up to the big leagues. All right, I got one more. I got one Red Sox story, and then I'll do some Q&A for you guys. Creighton Gubinach came up in 1999 with the Red Sox. He was a 6th-round pick by the A's in 1990, so it gives you a little bit of an idea. He definitely had served a substantial amount of minor league time before he got that opportunity at the big league level. In fact, the Red Sox were his 5th organization that he was in before he got to the big leagues. 5 organizations. You reach the majors with your 5th organization. It's pretty rare in and of it by itself. But he got a contract, with a kind of what he considered a just a token invite to spring training in 1999. He was the fourth catcher. So going in, he didn't really anticipate, without any unforeseen injuries or anything like that. He wasn't expecting to make the team, but he did want to at least, be seen and have an opportunity to at least get a little bit of playing time that would possibly be able to increase his chances of making the team later on in the season. He goes into Jimmy Williams' office and said, he's not getting any playing time because, look, I know the situation. I'm the fourth catcher here, but I could offer you this, this, and that. I just, if you could give me an opportunity, I'd appreciate it. No, he gets an opportunity. He gets a hit here. He fills in a game there, gets another hit. Before long, he's getting a little bit more playing time. But he's still the last player to get cut. He still gets cut. He ends up going to Pawtucket. Pawtucket, not too far into that particular season, but he's told by the Pawtucket manager, Gary Jones, who Gary Jones was actually somebody who had spent a lot of time as a minor league manager with the athletic situation. And Creighton, admittedly had a little bit of a, didn't always get along with, Gary too well. But in this particular situation, Gary was very happy to be able to say, hey, look, we've had our ups and downs, but I'm very, honored to be able to say that you're going to the big leagues. So Creighton goes up to the big leagues. And let me read you his story. This is going to go from how he's telling his parents he's made the big leagues all the way through to the small debut that he has. He comes in as a defensive replacement. Not in my wildest dreams did I think that that call was going to come after 9 years of being in the minor leagues. I was thinking, did I make the right decision? Should I have gone to college? Obviously, I had to call the parents. I'm like, hey, Mom, what are you guys doing tomorrow? She's like, well, your father has a couple of meetings and I have to go to work. What's wrong? I go, well, I wanted to see if you could come watch me play up in Boston. She's like, what do you mean? I thought you were playing in Pawtucket. I go, Mom, think about it. She drops the phone. My dad picks up the phone and goes, what the hell's going on? I go, I got called up. I'm going to the big leagues. He's like, you better not be effing with your mom right now. She's going to have a heart attack. I go, why would I screw with you guys about this? It was a Friday night, and my parents couldn't get the time off work to go to that particular Friday night game. They couldn't get out of those meetings. But I go through BP and everything. Then I go out to the bullpen. They call down and they say, all right, Goobs, you're going to catch if Jason Varitek gets on because they'll pinch run for him and you'll come in. Well, Varitek gets pulled in the bottom of the eighth. I'm like, oh my God, here we go. I'm running across the bullpen in Boston with all my gear on across right field, and I get down to the dugout. My mind is going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Derek Lowe is pitching. I'm like, all right, I know Derek. Not that big of a deal. Grady Little was like, all right, Goobs, you're going in. I'm like, all right, here we go. Literally, it may have lasted 3 minutes. Somebody got on. Wade Bogg comes up, hits into a double play, and the next guy strikes out. 3 minutes, and all of a sudden you run back in. Grady Little comes up to me and says, Goobs, congratulations. You played in the big leagues. That is Creighton's story. Now, if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, definitely would love to answer them now. If you go to calledupproject.com, that's the website I've been maintaining for the book. There is a page on there for ordering options, Amazon, McFarland, your local independent bookstore, Barnes & Noble, wherever you want to go ahead and get it. You can also email me. I have a few extra copies right now as well that I'd be happy to send, and I don't charge shipping for that. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and then definitely love to chat with you folks.
So you guys can go down to the bottom of the screen and click the reactions button. You will then see raise hand. Click that button and we'll get you in line so that you can ask a question of Zach Ford, our author for the evening. But right now we're going to go to question number 1, and that is Molly. Molly, you're up.
First of all, Zach, thank you for coming and sharing this lovely book with us.
Oh, thank you.
I would like to ask you, what did you find to be the most emotional story you learned?
The most emotional story. I mean, all these stories have so many levels of emotion in them. All if I have to pinpoint one story with a lot of ups and downs, I'd probably say Adam Greenberg. Adam Greenberg is the story when I created the idea for this book and started going, I really wanted to make sure I had Adam Greenberg's story included. To give you a little bit of background on Adam Greenberg, if you hadn't heard of Adam Greenberg came up with 2005 Chicago Cubs. He's playing the Marlins. He comes in as a pinch hitter. The very first pitch of his very first major league at bat, he gets beaned. And it's not just a bad beaning as far as how it impacts his, play on the field. It impacted his life afterwards. And he had to go through a lot of ups and downs, both on and off the field for many years afterwards. Couldn't really get things back together. Couldn't get back on track. Did eventually start feeling a little bit better many years later. He's playing independent league ball. He gets a 1 at-bat campaign. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. I want to say it was the end of the 13 season. So 1 at-bat campaign to get him 1 official major league at-bat. The Marlins, who are the team that he was playing when he was beaned, decided to give him that opportunity. He gets into a game late as a pinch hitter. And he's facing R.A. Dickey. R.A. Dickey was near unhittable that year and won the Cy Young. Adam Greenberg comes in. He strikes out on 3 pitchers, but everyone knows his story, so he gets a standing ovation. And his story is one of, I believe, 3 where I had multiple call-ups. So if a player had 5 years or more between call-ups, 5 years or more between their time in the major leagues, I included that second call. But Adam Greenberg, just how much he had to go through personally, the ups and downs that he experienced, was definitely the one that kind of rises to the top as far as the emotional story that I really wanted to capture for this book. So that's a very long answer. So I apologize for it being a 5-minute answer, but that's the that's the story that I really like.
Thank you.
I remember that. That very, very well. If I recall correctly, Baseball Tonight did quite a story on him when he got his 1 at bat. I thought it was quite a nice thing that the Marlins did. Let's go to Tony. Tony, my man, how you doing this evening?
Great. How are you?
I'm terrific. You're up.
Zach, thank you. Wonderful presentation. Would you please tell the story of the what I think you called him, a phantom major leaguer?
Whoa, phantom major leaguer. All righty. I think there may be a couple people on here that have heard this story. This is, as I alluded to earlier, I had not planned to include any phantom major leaguers, because part of the stories that I included were the debuts. But this guy had a story that was just way too good to not include. A guy by the name of Andy Shibboleth comes up 2002 Padres, and he is on the roster for a day. He is in the bullpen and is, a call comes out and says, hey, look, if this guy gets on, there was a runner on base. There was 1 out. There was a runner on base. And the call goes in the bullpen that says, hey, look, if this batter gets a hit, you're going to go in. All right. The batter gets a hit. So he's ready. He grabs his stuff. He's about ready to go. But during the play, the runner decides he wants to try and score. He gets thrown out at home. The batter then decides he wants to try and get over to second base. The catcher throws him out at second base. Inning is over. The Padres hit the next half inning. On the plane ride that night, Bochy calls Shibboleth up to the front and says, "Hey, look, bud, I'm sorry, but I got to make a change. You're going to go back down tomorrow." That is about as close as you can get, other than maybe Larry Yount, to having a major league debut. And Larry Yount, even though he technically didn't throw a pitch, he's still it's still sort of considered he's an official major league. He's not considered a phantom leader. But Andy Shibboleth's story is about as close as you can get to being an active major leaguer and making that debut without being able to. So, people always throw the name Moonlight Graham around. There are so many people that have much more intense stories than Moonlight Graham. So Andy Shibboleth is just one of them, but his story I had to include. It was just too interesting not to.
Thank you, Zach.
Larry Yount's story is pretty interesting too. Now that you bring him up, I would think that Mike Kaminsky might know a little bit about it, seeing as how he's a Brewers fan, although if I recall correctly, Larry was warming up for Houston.
He was announced for the game. Because he was announced for the game, he was considered that his stat line's 0, but he's still showing up in the record books.
Tore his labrum in warm-ups, if I remember right, and that was it. Yeah. Boy, talk about bad luck. Oof. How many stories did you leave out that you researched over time? You've got what I think it's 109 in the book. How many didn't get in?
Well, I interviewed 149. I interviewed 149 players. Originally, when I started this project, I had a goal of 75 to 100 for the book. After a few months, I realized I was going to be able to crush that goal. So then my goal became 150. The thing is, though, then I started talking to publishers, and I was starting to do the math, and I realized each story was about 850 to 900 words. I started doing the math on, what I would add to, and I was thinking, okay, well, the book's probably going to be around 130, 140,000 words. And all the publishers were like, no. Your book is not going to be 130,000 words. Your book, for this type of book, we want you to be around 80 to 90,000 words. So I'm like, well, crap, I'm doing the math, right? What am I going to do, right? And I've already interviewed these people. So, as I said earlier, I went about my interviews originally just on a trust system. Word of mouth. I didn't have them sign releases or anything like that, which I should have. In retrospect, I didn't think about that. But when I went back out to get the releases, I ended up with 109. Just total coincidence. So I ended up with 109 stories, and I only ended up cutting a couple of them, and that was I think one of the ones that I got a release of, I didn't include, and then a few other ones I just didn't pursue the releases of. But for by most part, if I interviewed a player, with the exception of a very few that were in the 60s where it was a little bit too sparse, I included the stories in the book. But I ended up with 109 stories, and I referenced the number of words that the publishers wanted me. They wanted me at 90,000 words. I'm doing the math after I get all my releases, and I'm doing the math, and I'm like, okay, well, shoot, I'm going to be closer to 95,000 words or a little bit over. So I call up, or I let McFarland know, hey, look, this is what I'm doing with my totals. Do it on the average of this many words per, I'm probably going to be about 95,000 words. I get an email back from Gary from McFarland, says, okay, as long as you're 95,000 words, that's going to be fine. Bruce, I copied and pasted my preface and introduction from separate documents into my book manuscript. I'm not kidding you. I was 95,000 words exactly.
Wow.
I knew that I knew I was going to be, because I kind of spaced around, I knew I was probably going to be within a few hundred, but to be 95,000 exactly was a little bit creepy, but it's almost too perfect, right? But it just the way it was. That's how I ended up with 109. That's how I ended up with the length of the book. It just worked out by pure luck.
Zach
But
Ford, luckiest man on the planet.
what's that?
Zach Ford, luckiest man on the planet. That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. Now, can
Yeah, I
I
was
go ahead?
almost freaked out. I was like, no, how in the world is this literally 95,000 words? This is just too weird.
What else do we have for Zach? Who's got questions, comments, or anything else for Zach? I don't want to take over asking him questions. All right, so I'm going to ask you something that's a little bit off the topic of baseball, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but and you might have an idea what what I'm going to ask you a little bit about, but I've noticed you on social media over the years, and you do a little bit of stand-up comedy now and again.
Mm-hmm.
How's that
And so
going?
it's really hard to do when somebody puts you on the spot about that. It's like, hey, be funny.
Well, no, I'm not asking you to be funny. I'm asking you how it's going.
No, I mean, I just do it it's one of those midlife crisis things. You know, you reach your mid 40s and you got to do the things that are on your list that you wanted to do in your 20s that you didn't do. So just took a few stand-up classes, and every once in a while I'll, go and play around at an open mic or a showcase or something like that, but nothing serious. It's just a fun hobby for me. It's not anything other than that. But yeah, the thing is I wanted to revisit in my mid 40s when I had a little bit more luxury with the kids being away and a little bit of more stability, or to focus more on my baseball writing, and to try stand-up comedy. So those are been able to check that off.
That's pretty cool because I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, I wouldn't have the guts to do anything like that. And I'm the guy, and HR Ryan's on the call. She's heard me say this once or twice before. I envy those who have the talent of writing like you do or she does, because I wish I could do it. I can't. So seeing you, HR, Bob Lemoyne in my chapter, Bill Nolan, countless Paul Allen, he's here tonight, seeing these writers come up with these fantastic books for all of us, I envy you. I laud you. I think it's great. Congratulations on the book, my friend.
Thank you so much. It's definitely been a labor of love, and I'm glad that everything materialized, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to chat with you guys.
Hey, Zach,
Yeah.
I got a follow-up idea for you. One of the things that always amused me was I have a couple friends from university days that made it to the major leagues, but did not stick very long. One of them was a guy by the name of Johnny Upper, who played for the Cubs, and a ground ball came back to him, and he reached out and deflected it, and the shortstop didn't get it. And Leo Droscher came out and said, keep your GD glove off of a ground ball, sent him back down to the minors, and he never went back up again. So how about your next book be stories of the guys who got there but didn't last very long?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, people joke around about that, but that's not a bad idea. I mean, I get people joking around, and probably probably a quarter to a half of the presentations I'll do, somebody at least alludes to an idea like that, half joking. But there is some validity to that particular idea. In fact, I've thought about, well, people go, what's an idea maybe sent down or released or traded or something like that. And actually what I'm working on right now is I'm working on this with a few major leaguers as well to try and develop the idea is the transition back to a quote normal job. So many people look at former, major leaguers and go, okay, well, this person maybe, no, they have not. If they are, a regular on a major league level, then yeah. But the vast majority of the people in my book, the vast majority of the people who reach the big league level don't have that much tenure. And keep in mind that they reach that level after struggling in the minor leagues for so long, right? So there is a serious transition back to normal life per se. So I've been, talking to a few players about kind of developing that idea, because I don't want the idea to all of a sudden become a 250 pages of people just, being resentful stories. But it's trying to find that balance, right? Of stories of people who may have had a little bit of challenge going back to the, the real world per se, or normal life, but ended up having successful second careers. And one of the things I have noticed in a lot of these players, that did not have substantial major league careers, that still, need to have a decent salary job, is a lot of them got into careers that require, a little bit of hustling, similar like what you would have to, put in that extra time, as a baseball player, the competitive type jobs like sales, finance, mortgage brokers, real estate. A lot of the ball players have, chose those as second careers. And I have thought about, and like I said, I'm developing an idea for kind of like that transition phase. Because look, I'm chair of the Dusty Baker-Sacramento SABR chapter. I've been a SABR nerd for 30 years. But to be candid with you, I like stories. Like what I like about baseball, I like human interest stories.
Sure.
I totally understand and I totally appreciate the importance of, sabermetrics and statistics. And I totally understand, academic level writing, reports, but that's not my love. That's not my passion. My passion is, being able to record and share those first person player stories. And I thought that if I need to try and, I'm still developing the idea, but I want to have still a relatively positive book about, former players, becoming, normal. I guess they wouldn't be normal Joe Schmoes, because, it's still pretty amazing to say you play in the major leagues, even if you do end up having an average job after that. But something like, the major leaguer next door, or major league neighbors, or something like that is what I'm thinking about as far as
that'd be, I think that the human interest is always important. Like a lot of times I added a chapter in my book. Because of my wife, basically, what did these guys do after they got done? So there's that part of it. But thanks a lot. I enjoyed your talk, and I'm going to certainly get a hold of that book.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, this has been a great way to start 2024. Now, next week, Monday, January 15th, we're going to get together again at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for the second in our series of debates featuring Dr. Clayton Truder, the chair of the Gardner-Waterman chapter in Vermont. In this edition, Dr. Truder will be debating the Hall of Fame credentials of Mark McGwire with fellow SABR member and author Dale Tafoya, who will be with us as well. It's sure to be a great discussion. Don't forget to sign up and bring your questions for our participants so they can debate these questions as they go along. We'll have a little vote at the end, see who won the debate. Last time Dr. Truder won. Maybe this time Dale can slide into home a little bit before him. So we'll see what happens. But that'll be 7 o'clock Monday night, January 15th. Zach Ford, I want to thank you very much, my friend, for doing this evening. Tell us one more time, where can we get that book, my man?
Calledupproject.com. Go ahead and go to there. There'll be multiple options, or you could also just send me an email at zachford at gmail.com. Remember, Zach is spelled goofy, Zakford at gmail.com, and I can figure out a way to send you a direct copy signed.
That's fabulous. All right, guys. We will see you next Monday night. Thanks a lot for coming out. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Zach. We'll see you again soon.
Take care.